Okay, welcome everyone. I just try and do a share screen. Let's have a look here. Um, okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yes, we can see the board.
Okay, so let me just try and open up the right. It's going to be project management, isn't it, for September?
No, search for meeting. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, let me just do the preamble. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the SingularityNET Archive meeting. Just to give you a brief introduction for those who may not know what we're about. The SingularityNET Archive contains a history of the activities of the SingularityNet Ambassador Program. All our content is open source and licensed under open source licenses, as well as Creative Commons. We record, that's not the right link for this meeting, but we do video recordings of our meetings, and our goal is to provide a collaborative platform for the SNet archive community to share knowledge, ideas, and best practices, and we welcome contributions. And our process is to um, work from a project board, but the first thing we start from is also we look at action and decision items. And that is usually done by Vanny, and then it hands it back to me for the project board. So, Vanny, do you want to look at the action and decision items?
Yeah, let's do that. You made it sound really exciting. You'll have to unshare. There
Yeah,
we go.
I'll try my best to make it sound exciting.
Da. There it is. All right, so this is for people's information. This is kind of how we originally intended the summary tool to be used to go back and track action items and decisions from previous meetings. So I've got who's here. I've got the GitHub issue for the meeting and things we're going to be discussing later in brief. The report and budget for quarter 3 and 4. Right, so decisions from last meeting are still in here because I've just opened the previous meeting summary. So last time we said that as token price again remains low, we still were not going to submit any pending Q1 tasks, although we might rethink and pay anyway in September. And we've had a little conversation about it and we think, yeah, we might well do that because probably shouldn't leave unpaid tasks for too long despite token price. I mean, the problem for people who weren't around with Q1, the budget was calculated at a staggering 55 cents. So, yeah, we were kind of holding off paying Q1 tasks when the token price dropped. So, we'll see. I think we're kind of agreed that, yeah, we will put it through as soon as possible, but maybe not in Thursday's payment. Um, on the monthly archive Gitbook issues, summaries are still being submitted without any chasing, and there is a continuing pain point with finding time to do town hall summaries, which we will get to later on in this meeting. Malik has basically built something that will automate that with Andre's input, so that's really amazing, and that pain point is addressed, or at least we think it is. Um, just went over what we said about what we were doing in July and August. So I will amend that and update it to what we've been doing for most of August and a bit of September. Um, we noted that the budgets are likely to be due on the 8th of September. That is not the case. They're due today at midnight and they're actually in. So I'll amend this decision item to reflect that. And action items, there weren't any outstanding ones. So I think it's a bit annoying actually that it seems to have deleted the ones that were there, which is a bit frustrating. But just to update people, I had a long-standing one to try and get deep funding town hall summaries to be added to the archive. And Abdul Bassett, who we met last night in town hall, has undertaken it. So that's a good thing. But that's about it.
Cool, thanks, Vanny. Let me just go back to sharing the project board again. Um, Okay, can everyone see that? Yep.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So now, oh, a new person coming. Now we're going to run through the project board. Thank you, Annie, for going through all the action and decision items there. Um, Andre's not here, so the only thing I can think of that's relevant to Andre in my mind, I can't see his an issue for his work here, but was that there was an issue with updating the data to the repo uh, from the GitHub action, which has been resolved. So Andre's resolved that issue where basically up-to-date data dumps is now being dumped into the GitHub repository for SNet. And that was important because we need that data to be up to date so that we can then do sort of graph analysis on it. So is there anything else we need to talk about Andre's work, Vanny?
I might ask him actually if he can put some details of the work he did with Malik into an issue, just so we've got a record of it.
Right.
Because it's occurred to me that with him not here, we can't sort of give much detail, and it's
Yeah.
all in our in our Discord chat. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So there is work going on. So I just trying to speak as best as I can for Andre. Do you want to cover your issues first, Vanny, or shall I cover mine?
I mean, a lot of mine are just archive book, and it's done, and I just was approving summaries as we just before the meeting, and I don't want to make mistakes with actually updating the issues. So
Mhm.
I should
Mhm.
do that after this meeting. But yeah, we could have a quick look at the budget and report, I suppose.
Is that this one here?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, just to say, if you scroll down to the bottom, I've just added links and they're in the governance dashboard. So just a note for anybody who's not aware, there is a period from today until the 22nd when people can comment and ask questions on the report, and we'll be able to make changes. And then the consent process opens on Monday the 22nd. I don't know if you actually want to have a quick look at the budget, Stephen. I think we did go through it, but on the top link,
Okay.
we made, well, we've done pretty much what we said we would do.
Oh, I can't really navigate it very well, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh
Yeah.
no. I
I
can
mean,
screen share it if you want, but
where do you want me to go? Is
no, just
this
basically just to show people what we've done. We've
okay?
kind of broken up the project management cost a little bit so that it's a bit clearer. And basically, we continue with the knowledge graph development stuff, which Stephen will talk about in a little while, but we've kind of decided to move away from Neo4j towards trying to do it in an open source way via Python. And then this whole rule-based audit and community engagement, we've separated out a little bit of money to try and do a session at the end of quarter 4, where we're kind of asking the community to do a bit of rule-based audit and to also kind of verify the outputs of a graph process. Because, like I was saying before, we're lucky enough that we've got the community that wrote these meeting summaries right here. So we can say to people, okay, a graph is showing that such and such is the case, that this particular person is a bit of a bridge, or this particular person is quite central. Do you think that feels right? Does that sound right to you? Because it's interesting to see people's perceptions versus what the graph says. Then we've got a little bit for meeting documentation, a little bit for contingency, just in case price drops, and summary tool development is deferred again until quarter 1 next year, because we basically are finding the more we work with the knowledge graph approach, the more we're seeing things that could influence what the summary tool should be like. And so it probably would be best to kind of get that work further along before we do more on redesigning the tool. And that's about it.
Okay, great. Shall I move back? Are there any other issues? There's a quarterly report as well that you just drafted
Oh
as
yeah, I
well.
mean, if you maybe if you drop the link to that issue in the chat, and if people want to have a look,
Yeah,
or you can
yeah,
get actually you can see it directly in the governance tool. We should try and push people to there.
yeah. Okay. Can you drop the link? I don't seem to be able to.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, and that provides more information about the context and the budgeting for what we're doing. So that's great, Vanny. You covered the archives Gitbook updates are ongoing, as we said. Um, and is there anything else you need to talk about?
I can't think so. I think that's my only issues are apart from that. Oh, open source policy and culture. I've had another dig into that policy development thing, but I still haven't really finished. That's a Q1 issue. So yeah, I need to get a bit of a wriggle on with that. But yeah, it just feels like so much of what we're doing feeds into these questions of ethics and open source and AI ethics in record keeping. So I'm doing a bit of reading around with what the record keeping world is doing around
Right.
AI ethics, and it's quite interesting. So I need to feed that into the issue.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I'll move on to graph development now. And the last major workflow was on taking data from our the downloads that sorry, I'll just show here the downloads that Andre providing for from the meetings, which are stored here in the archive repository, and there's data downloads here. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, that there was a kind of issue where this wasn't being updated, but now, as you can see, it is being updated, and this downloads the meeting summary data in JSON format, as you can see here, in two formats, by ID and by array. The data that I'm using for, or we're going to be using for graphing it is the not ordered, but just the raw data in terms of the array, this data here, as it's laid out. Um, the initial development I've been doing, I originally was going to take this data, converted it into CSV, and then imported it into a proprietary tool called Neo4j, which some people may be familiar with. Um, that was okay, but the problem with that is a proprietary tool. It's not open source. We don't have so much control over what we're doing. We can't, we're not. It's not that reproducible. And also potentially has a cost if we continue using that tool if you want to expand its use. So what I've done instead of that is to develop a ground up approach by developing all the algorithms and the graphing myself or ourselves in Python. And I created a repository for this called Graph Python scripts here. And this, well, first of all, there's some explanation here. What this does is it takes the JSON file and then examines the JSON file and identifies what's a node and what's an edge. So what a sort of primary node is, or, like a verb, and what its relationship is with something else like the edge. And this just produced in Python code, and then outputs the graph as a PNG file, as a graphics file here, as you can see there. And then I did another version where that just took a single record as a kind of that took a single record, and that's what a single record looks like, exported with its nodes and edges into a graphic format. And then I did a sample on all the data, which was this was actually 13 records, and this is just the raw data. And that was like a proof of concept, which shows that you can write a Python script, which is quite small, which will just take the JSON data, examine it, identify nodes and edges, and output a graph format using native Python libraries. Then I did some research on what open source tools are available for taking that raw data and doing analysis. There is kind of big consensus is that there's a major academic tool called GPhy, which is a like a statistical analysis tool for graph data. And so I wrote another script which actually takes the data and converts it into a GIF XML format. So it takes the data, it identifies nodes and edges, and then reformats that in a format that can be imported into GIF. Now, oh, let's go back to the issue. I did some screenshots for this to give more illustration of what's been done in the issue here. So this is the issue for September. So I've been working on this month. And so it's got documentation of the different scripts here. And if you want to go to the repo, you can see the actual code for it there. And then there's the export script documentation. And then I did some screenshots of what that looks like imported into Gphy. So this, you take this data, which is like an XML file essentially, and that allows you to import into the Gphy analysis tool. And then that creates kind of a raw graph, which looks like this, which is like a very basic view. So it just takes all the graph data and just dumps it in an undifferentiated way, as you can see here. Then you can refine that using different, that's just some error message there. Then that's just undifferentiated data. Then you can start to apply graphical and statistical methods to the graph data, which allows you to try to start to discern patterns. So a basic approach is one basic approach, for example, is just color coding it. So even if you just take that raw import and color code it, you can already see that there's some patterns emerging there. Now, you can take that a step further by applying statistical layouts. And each of these have these are standard, sort of academically um, defined layouts, which will look at different nodes and edges and apply an algorithm to them to see what patterns and clusters or communities are in the data. This one is actually called the, I'm trying to pronounce it, the Fuchsman-Rheingold layout, which is a force directed. So it tries to see the weights of different nodes and how they relate to each other in a graph layout. So there's a closer view of that. Again, that's starting to reveal patterns, but again, it still needs more refinement. So again, you start to apply more refined methods to it, and there's a more refined method called the Forced Atlas 2 layout, which is a more sophisticated version of a directed graph analysis. And this starts to disambiguate clusters. So you can start to see that these little clusters are starting to break up, and you're starting to see the relationship and the strength of the relationships between different clusters. Actually, these are tending to correspond to work groups. And you can take that again further by applying this, well, that's a data laboratory, by applying a more colored view so you see more clearly what the disambiguation of the different work groups are. So this is just the first playing around with it. So you can see that each color is a different work group, and then you can see how these different work groups relate to each other in terms of the edges that they share between nodes. And these could be things like tags, people who attend meetings, things like that. We need to start to structure what questions we're going to ask of that. When you start to see large clusters like here, that is actually, you can then isolate large clusters or start to do analysis of those large clusters themselves. And this is like the governance workgroup node, which has a lot of nodes connections. And then we can sort of identify those sort of patterns and do further analysis of that. I think that's the data view of what's being looked at there in terms of a flat file. And that's it on the documentation I've done so far on that. So the step is to continue to do that. Was just done on 13 records, and now that Andre has amended so that we now have a data dump, I want to do that analysis on all the records that we have in a certain year, and then to look at apply discrete methods to it to see what are the main clusters and what the main patterns are. Um, sorry, is there any questions on that or? No, no questions. Okay, the once the patterns have been decided, has been stabilized, and we've seen, you know, the sort of what's relevant in terms of communities and clusters that relate to each other, then we can then create the next step, which I'll do in the autumn and going forward, is to take that is to do another conversion on the data. So you take the work group data that's been recorded is downloaded in a JSON file, then a script is applied to that, which then converts that into nodes and edges. Those nodes and edges are then going to be analyzed in the graph database using tools like GPhy, which is a statistical analysis tool. Then we can, once we have decided what kind of statistical methods we want to apply consistently going forward, like then we can then convert the data into um, um, kind of representations of those queries. And so we'll end up with a representation of all the data as nodes and edges and a representation of the patterns in the data in a kind of JSON format. Once we have that, we will then use that as the context for a generative model. So that's how we get to a generative model. The generative model will then relate to that contextualized data using vectorization. But we haven't got there, so that's where we're going, the direction we're going in. We've got GPhy. If I can show you what maybe GPhy looks like. The web page for GPhy is here. That's what it's an open source graph network analysis tool. And also it allows you to directly manipulate the raw data. So you can import also CSV files and things like that. And also it's a kind of standard format which can be used, an open format that can be used in other tools as well. So this is the kind of thing we'll be doing. We'll be doing exploratory data analysis and applying metrics, for example, centrality metrics, social ranking, that kind of thing. So we could analyze, for example, who has the most influence in the community, that kind of thing. But we won't ask all questions. We will stabilize on the questions that most interest us, and that's a process that we need to go through. Is to say, like, are we most interested in, for example, who has the most influence, or what are the most, what are the how do these tags relate to different work groups, that kind of thing. And once we have agreed what interests us, then we can then um, um, transform the data to create a structure that can then talk to a generative model. So that's it for that. So
We should probably mention that you're doing a session at Sandbox Stroke Think Tank next Thursday, not tomorrow, but next week,
it's
to
next
kind of
Thursday. Yeah.
sort of demonstrate a few of the things we've been doing. But I don't know, since this is going to be quite a short meeting, probably, I did wonder if maybe people here, do you have any thoughts about, if you had a really comprehensive knowledge graph of the ambassador program, what would you want to know? I mean, I'm quite interested in where different tags come up in different meetings and how how a topic kind of percolates through the system. I'm also quite interested, as Stephen said, in what you could call maybe influence, but it's interesting how fluid it is. It's not, from what we can see, it's not like there's one person, three people, whatever, who are influential all the time. It's so contextual, which is, I don't know, speaks well of our decentralization, I suppose. But yeah, I've thought maybe we could throw that open to the floor. What would you want to know? What would you ask?
We maybe need to communicate this better because also in the quarterly report, I did try and draft a section about what our minimum, what the minimum, what we're going to start with. Okay, in terms of because graph analysis usually starts with standard, a few standard approaches. I mean, you can ask any question of a graph, but then there's always some basic approaches. And we did a brief reference to that. I probably should document it elsewhere in our quarterly report. And for example, one of the first one is something called degrees. So that is like, for example, who is popular, who has degree is related to a node and the number of edges that go into that node. And then there's things like betweenness, like who connects different nodes to each other. So, for example, someone who may attend different meetings and apply and do different actions across meetings, they may have a kind of significance of betweenness between different work groups. So they may have some sort of significance there or no significance. And then there's another one which is closeness, which is who is most, for example, that might imply who is most deeply involved with a particular topic or a typical project or a particular work group. So who consistently is close to a certain node, and why, might be. And then something called eigenvector, who is influential by association. But I can't think off the top of my head. Probably what I need to do maybe before next week's sandbox, Bunny, is to do some basic explanation of that.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, what I'm trying to say is that I know that that's where we're going to start. But while we've got people here, it would be interesting to hear what kind of things people would be interested in
Yeah,
without trying to frame it too much.
yeah. So yeah, as an open question, we have the data. We have data that has been provided through the dashboard of all the work groups. So data on all the work groups and the meeting summaries, what people have decided, um, how they describe themselves, how different people attend different meetings, and so on. So, if anyone has any um, obvious questions, what would be an obvious question to start with? That would be of interest to us? I mean, welcome to put it in chat as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking how to formulate. I'm not sure it would be a concretely asked like this, but just yeah, having this insight on who's involved where and whether it's also getting reflected in recognition, because
Right.
that part it also ties a bit to this keeping track of voluntary work, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting insights into that would be quite interesting to me.
Yeah. Because I think we can have, it's not just as simple as attendance, for example. But you could have someone who attends lots of different meetings. That's one example, but that doesn't necessarily tell you everything. You might also have who is assigned decisions, that kind of thing, or um, who is associated with certain things as well, like who is associated with certain topics, for example, that might be come out in terms of that. So that may give us some hint of the nature of how people contribute, Peter. So we have to be careful here because some of the data can be associative. Like for example, if you attend a lot of work groups with that meetings that discuss a certain subject, that may be accidental or it may not be. But things like that will um, could, as you say, again, I suppose what we're looking for is, are we aiming for recognition there? Is that what we're aiming for? Vanny.
One of the things it's revealing to me, obviously, meeting summaries are all about the meetings that we have. And I think there's an awful lot of work that goes on in DMs and in Discord and, just in other places. So it's kind of making me a little bit aware of the limitations of the archive in
Mm,
capturing who we are as a community. I
yeah.
think, from experience of community archives, whatever you archive, there's always limitations. You can't capture everything, but it is interesting, the extent to which things go on outside of meetings. Because I kind of feel when I first came into the program, there was so much that went on outside meetings, and then it kind of moved to be mainly meetings based, and now it feels like it's kind of diverging again. And I guess it's something that's always in flux in a community, but it's just interesting the shape it takes.
Absolutely. And actually, while you mentioned when you mentioned that, you may reminded me of something I haven't talked about. Again, the the analysis we're doing is on JSON files that have been exported from the meeting summary tool, and that's a hierarchically structured fixed structure, if you like. So if you say it's structured data, um, but we also record data within that, which is not necessarily so structured, like, for example, free text. And the next stage, I mean, I haven't really begun working on this because I'm only one person, but what I hope to do this year as well is to look at unstructured data. This could be thing, and then so for example, if we look at the structured data of all the work groups, then we can get answers to questions about really banal questions, if you like who attends what and all that kind of thing. That's maybe helpful. But then if you separately analyze the unstructured data that's related to a specific work group, and that can be things like the free text, how people describe themselves in the free text, what documents they link to, as well as another example. Now, there's a different approach to the unstructured data through, they tend to be semantic analysis tools, which again, so you would look at that unstructured data and run semantic analysis, which is like what verbs there are, what nouns they are, and convert that into graphs as well. And that will create a very different type of graph, which will talk about things like sentiment. Like again, these are things we need to be very careful about because one person's view of sentiment can be different from another's, but also it will could show you how patterns in how people express themselves, if you like. So that's another possibility. So, Banny, yeah.
But, this is exactly the sort of thing that it's really good to sense check with the community. If you're getting kind of sentiment analysis on unstructured data, the best people to say whether it rings true is the people who are part of the community that created things. And this is one reason. And now I really hope that maybe we're nearly at the point where people will realize why I have for 2 years asked people to use emotion tags in their meeting summaries,
Mm,
because that's something that you can also graph.
yeah. I mean, again, things like there can be things like semantic proximity. So let's say you have a whole load of tags, and you have people are using different words for similar sentiments. That's something that could come even out of the structured data. But there is going to be quite an interesting contrast between the unstructured data and the structured data. But I probably shouldn't talk too much. But where we're beginning with is structure. So we're beginning with the hierarchical JSON, the kind of the facts, if you like, there, who attended the meeting, what decisions were made, how that meeting was tagged, all that kind of thing, which is like unambiguous, if you like. It's not, it's hierarchical and it's fixed. So that's the first analysis we would do is on that data. And you're right, Ben. I probably need to come up with because it relates to AI ethics, really. I need to come up because our objective is to do this with consent of the community. So I need to come up with a process where, let's say we ask a question. So we take the graph data, ask a question, and then sign that off with the community. So I'll probably need to come up with that. Maybe that's a task I need to set myself for the next meeting and do a test run for that. And I mean, at the beginning, before the meeting was recorded, also was thinking about different ways that this can be interfaced. It feels it's quite frustrating just to talk it from my perspective because essentially I'm the one who's just running this. I mean, I need to become and realize we need to come to a stage where we have something more interactive. So I'll also look at the possibility of even doing basic tests using a Discord bot, maybe. So again, that would come to a kind of because of the need for community involvement here. Peter, yeah.
Um, yeah, what you just said, and also like you mentioned before on the Discord bot side of things, it does make me think of what R&D Guild is doing with the governance dashboard. There's
Right.
also LLM integration there, and yeah, made me wonder if there's any plans on I don't know collaborations or API access or yeah, any sharing, let's say.
Yeah, I'm open to it as soon. I mean, all that I have an open source repository for this, Peter. So which could be a moment it is just scripts. So basically, and the reason why I took that approach was to is so that the code is understandable. Again, this is a kind of a didactic aspect to this. So like how you take standard Python libraries, access open data that's recorded on GitHub repositories, and convert that using Python methods. Now, so those, if I can standardize those scripts, then I can say to any other work group, I can say, if you want to access this work group data, you can use this script, you know. So there's certainly that's already here, that's already possible. And sort of I'm open to collaboration on that basis. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if that helps, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I have the full insights on what kind of integrations would make sense, but it's
Yeah,
also not a surprise that you would be open to it. But yeah,
yeah,
it's still good.
yeah. I suppose I'm kind of been concentrating very much on building the tools and not thinking so much about. I suppose I need to think more about how people interact with this. I suppose. Um, there's also people understanding as well. Vanny.
Yeah, I was just thinking that one of the things I'm noticing about what R&D has been doing, they've got this little chat bot, but they haven't really been able to constrain it yet. And I'm wondering if maybe so in the end, it's just kind of, I don't know, it would be potentially really interesting to have something that could help people assess proposals. But at the moment, if you ask it to do that, it uses kind of what it maybe thinks it has access to, which is kind of 1990s corporate
Mm,
how to write a budget kind of stuff, which isn't
yeah,
really that applicable to our context. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe some integration of the way that we're working with graphs could be useful there.
yeah. I mean, I again, that is really what distinguishes our approach. Really, is that what we're doing is we're not taking. I mean, because we have all the raw data, I could just take all that raw data in JSON format and just throw it into a generative model. And what we're doing is actually building a context that will constrain that before it's put into a generative model. So, I mean, so your point is very salient there, Vanny. A generative model is never neutral. It always will have it always will be trained in a certain way. Okay. So if you ask it to, talk about philosophy, or, tell you about, to assess whether something is written well or something, or that those kind of tasks which you might use ChatGPT to do. What it'll do is it'll go away and it'll rely on context that it has been trained on by default, and that will may turn out to be, for example, standard attitudes in the literature, or business language, as you put it, Vanny. Yeah. But what we're trying to do is when we're not doing that. What we're doing is saying this is the context we want. And that's what we mean by community context. So not only so how should our data be structured? What does it mean when, say, this person attends all these meetings and does this and this? What does that mean before we give it to um, a generative model? So a generative model becomes much more of a trained interface rather than something that instigates an interpretation. So we have a role in the interpretation. I suppose that's the objective. For example, if you can apply the same thing, could you just say that so a generative model has been used to assess proposals? Is that what's going on, Vanny?
No, not explicitly. I mean, they've got a little chat bot, and sometimes if you go in and ask it something like, "Oh, tell me what to think about this proposal,"
Mm,
it will give you a summary. And sometimes it will go, "Oh no, I'm just a chatbot. I can't possibly." So, do you know what I mean? It's kind
mm.
of sometimes it's trying to use like external sources, like A-level business textbooks from 1992 is what it reads like it's using. But
Yeah,
it's just when it does venture an opinion on a proposal, it has very little grasp of our decentralized context.
yeah,
And it tries to assess it as if it's assessing a budget for a Microsoft sub project from the 90s. So I don't know. I'm sort of feeling like it is kind of recursive, but it's like we use meeting summaries as part of the evidence of who we are to create a knowledge graph, and then we use the insights from that knowledge graph to help train a
yeah,
chatbot on, how it should assess things. What does this community think is good in a proposal? Because
yeah,
otherwise it can be really laborious, to try and train it. Um,
yeah,
and kind of come up with some kind of schema that isn't really grounded in who we actually are.
yeah. I
I
mean,
think sometimes we think we're something and we're not quite that.
ab-
I don't
absolutely.
know.
I think also there's two. I mean, Peter just mentioned about teaching, and this maybe the bot needs more teaching. Well, there's two aspects to teaching here. On the one side, there's the source material. Okay, so let's say the chatbot is looking at proposals. Presumably the data is coming from some sort of source for that. Okay, now the nature of that source will dictate how the model will interpret it. So if it's unstructured, it may rely on its semantic interpretation, if you like, my more semantic interpretation. If it's very structured, it may look at it and discover logic in that structure and say, oh, this meeting obviously means this because it's labeled like that. Yeah. That's the source side of it. That's one side of it. The other side of it is the prompt side of it. And also prompts aren't just you shouldn't, it's not necessarily about, like, for example, if I just ask a question of some data, what's the average of this data? There's many different definitions of averages. So it's going to decide itself what that average is. But if you actually specify, no, tell me the mean of this data or the medium of the data, then it knows specifically to ask that question. So it's not going to get that, in inverted commas, wrong. Yeah. So that's another thing we're doing here with the graph analysis, is that we're actually going to take the data, apply interpretation to our graph, to our data, and then record that interpretation in the data itself. So when the data goes to a prompt, the generative model, you'll be telling the generative model, use these methods to interpret the data. So then it's less likely, or it's not, it can't hallucinate in that sense. Vanya, sorry.
No, I was just thinking about how much data we've got in this community, and it's just great
Mm.
that we have got that to work on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just
Yeah.
to clarify that the governance dashboard is taking data from meeting from work group budgets and quarterly reports. Now, obviously, all it's got in there at the moment is the current ones, but we were talking yesterday about trying to load in historical data. And
Right.
again, I think this is the interesting thing about what we think we are versus what we actually are. It's kind of you could load in all the past reports and budgets, and that's one
Mm.
thing. But then if you then load in the results of the consent process, which is kind of what people actually think of those things and the issues that they've raised about them, that's a whole different perspective and could give you, do you know what I mean? If you try to define some abstract idea of what is a good proposal in this community, you'd come up with one thing. But then if you actually look at the things people actually object to, it's kind of a different thing. So
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine, well, first of all, presumably you've got just numerical data on one hand as well. Yeah. So, I mean, also I would have a concern there to make sure that that is correct. So the other thing is about verification of data. So if you're using data with a generative model, you need to make sure that it's answering questions correctly, and that's not necessarily obvious. So there is that. Also, as you say, if you apply sentiment to something, again, you need to look for patterns there, I suppose. And I suppose that's something that maybe this archive project could help with, maybe, because I've identified I'm going to try and start with basic pattern recognition for things, like things like proximity and all that kind of stuff. And but as you say, Vanny, that needs to be also complemented with what interests people, I suppose. Um, I mean, there's a bit of a funny trade-off there because what interests people will also people people need to know the questions they can ask as well, maybe I suppose as well. So that's another thing that we're trying to do here is if I show a graph of all the work groups that's color coordinated, like a kind of organic map, then people might start to see patterns there also as well. That's another thing I'm working on is to so it's more intuitive, if you like. So there is that as well. But yeah, I mean, sentiment is another is because also you have structured sentiment and unstructured sentiment. For example, structured sentiment would be like tags. Let's say you put tags on something that's how you feel about it. You put it as words, and that's the kind of structure. So you can enumerate that, but then you have maybe have a document which is full of semantic information that has sentiment in it. That's a different approach as well there. But anyway, small steps. It's like I mean, I hope to as you say, Peter's work. It's probably important to work with other people to make this as open to people, and also that people can understand this as well. Hopefully,
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic there. The
yeah.
only potential thingy there to well be aware of is that the ASI1 model being used is technically not open source. So
Mm.
that's a thing. It does provide API access, but yeah. So if you're aiming to fully stick on open source tooling, that's currently not the case for that specific model.
Right. Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, also, I mean, I'm interested in how this may sit in the SingularityNET ecosystem, AI ecosystem in general. Yeah, because the AI being developed is not generative as such, is it? So generative models are not the main interest of SNET, would you say, Peter?
Well, they're generally seen as parts of the bigger stack. But yeah,
Yeah,
no, they wouldn't be like right now. It's a concrete product that's out there by Fetch,
yeah.
and
But
that,
it's
yeah,
not
not
it's
from
not the
SNET side,
main
we're not making another one. Let's put it
yeah,
like that.
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting compare. I was occurred to me because I suppose there's maybe the sentiment amongst the AI community that generative models are the way to go. That's the way AI is going to um, get closer to a singularity, not a single, get closer to intelligence, if you like, And I suppose that's a particular point of view, isn't it? It's not the only point of view.
Yeah, I would say SingularityNET doesn't really have that as its main view. Over the years, it has shifted a little bit. Well, LLMs, when they came up, SingularityNET was very, yeah, well, not against them, but really strong on saying like, no, this doesn't bring us any closer to AGI.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
that now has shifted a little bit to like, well, they can play a role,
mm.
not a major role, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean, in a way, they may have a point because it may be because it's also about the limitations. Because essentially, all a graph is a statistical method, and all a generative model is a kind of weighted interpretation of a statistical method. So that's all it is, if you like. So it
yeah,
could be you could say that all we're doing is improving, automating our community in a more user-friendly way or something. I'm not sure.
yeah, sure. And that in itself, it is a good step. It will feed into later steps of like actual reasoning, which
Yeah,
so far we don't really have yet. That's what OpenCog Hyperon is aiming at.
right.
Um, but yeah, yeah, LLMs, I would say that they do play a role, but it tends to be over exaggerated a little bit. Like it kind of makes sense, like from a user perspective. Right now, if you talk to ChatGPT or well any model, um, you can do way more than you could do like 2 3 years ago, right? So
Yeah,
and it's way more mainstream, more adoption. So in that sense, it's not weird that people see this as a big evolution and like assuming it will just keep on going. But
yeah.
yeah, there's some limits there.
I mean, another thing, again, I might rely on you, Peter, is because what we've done so far is nothing to do with generative model. It's just about graphs now, and that's one way of conceptualizing data. Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see if there's any parallels with that and other SNet activities because yeah, I'm not so. I did some research about a few months ago, but SNet is much more has a different, maybe conceptual approach to intelligence. Yeah, and so if we can start to conceptualize, understand how we're conceptualizing about data, then maybe that's like an approach to that. That's what I'm saying, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, yeah, for sure. We do have something called atom space within yeah the whole OpenCog approach, which don't really have like a marketing ready sentence to explain the difference with the knowledge graphs, but
Yeah.
basically they're knowledge graph plus plus, let's say.
Right. Okay.
Let me see if I can find a link
I'll
diving.
try and save the chat and I'll look into that because as we go forward, obviously that would be helpful because, I mean, I'm not necessarily a big fan of generative models because I kind of understand I think they're very powerful on one level in a sense, but I kind of agree, if you like, with SNETs that they're not, in inverted commas, the only way to go about things, if you like. But what I do think is really key, particularly for a community, is to um, grow understanding conceptually about their data. And I think that's the really important, more important than say the generative side, really. So
Yeah, yeah, fully
yeah,
agree.
yeah, yeah. Okay, that's great. I'll open that. There we go. Okay, I'll look at save that and have a look at that. Is that a graph approach? It is a graph approach. Okay.
Yeah,
Like
it is. It is, as they put it. It's a hypergraph, or yeah,
hypergraph.
metagraph sometimes gets used as well.
Is it open source or
Yes.
okay? I might even be able to use it then, maybe. Not sure. I'll have to have a look in that. Thanks for that. I'll look at that. And if I can use it, I will use it. I'm trying to use tools that we obviously going to be more in sync with the community, more in sync with our, SNet, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's very useful. Okay. Okay, I'm been a bit of a one-man band. I'm sorry about this. But yeah. So again, I'm also sorry about, if you like, the slowness of this. That's only me, and but if anyone has any input or development experience of graphs, they're welcome to participate or post in our Discord. But as I say, the next step will be I'll be looking at doing basic interpretations and creating transforming the data so it contains those interpretations. That's what I'll try and do. But I'll also look at those other things like atom space, as you say, Peter, as well. Any other comments or anyone wants to say on the project board? Let's have a look. I think we have covered everything.
Well, I did see on the previous, just this mention about the archiving tool and the meeting summaries of Town Hall. I was happily surprised yesterday to see right after concluding the Town Hall, it was there. But I kind of do feel, yeah, I was just wondering where that summary is coming from. Like, how is it generated? Because I
I
was
think
talking with
yeah,
Malik.
you think they're using Read AI and they're taking that to produce timestamps for the video, if I'm right. I need to go and check what Malik actually said, what he's done. But yeah,
No, I
I think
think the moment it is in Read AI, it gets uploaded to the summary tool. But I was comparing the two, and like the summary in the summary tool was missing some information, which I felt like, okay, why
um,
not just copy paste the summary instead of making a summary of the summary? Maybe it's
Hmm.
not the right place to discuss this. I
no,
just,
it probably
yeah.
is the right place. No, but I think what they're doing is they're using it to generate timestamps for the video, and then historically, our template for like a video-based meeting, like a town hall, just used whatever timestamps were prepared, which video work group used to do. So it's just automating that, I think.
Do you have any indications? Is Andre extracting that data into our meeting summary tool then?
No, no, that's what I'm saying.
All
Malik's
right,
built tooling to automate that.
right, okay,
So we don't have to do anything now, which is great.
okay. Oh, it'd be good. I mean, I haven't really looked into that either, so I'm not really. But presumably, it's converting data that's been imported into our database. Is that right?
No, I think it's adding it to the database afterwards. So it's
Right.
adding it as if it was adding a meeting summary.
Ah,
So it
right,
gets into the database via the summary tool.
right. So it must be using Read AI, as you say, and then
Yeah.
converting that to a format that can be imported into our tool. Okay.
Well, like I said, it's converting it to video timestamps and then adding it to the template that we've got for video-based meetings, which includes a little space for YouTube timestamps.
All
So
right.
I
Okay.
think it's doing it that way.
All right. Okay. I'm be interested to see how that comes out in our data dumps, I suppose. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. But yeah, again, we need to do analysis of the data, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
mean it's not very, it's like in line with the fact that we're not auditing meeting summaries very much at all. And I do know that some of it is going to be nonsense.
mm,
But I don't know. I suppose this is what I'm interested in with the whole knowledge graph approach is overall, do we end up with stuff that is nonsense if we have a load of nonsense summaries? Which we
Well,
have. We've got a lot of nonsense summaries. I have to sit on my hands every week not to correct them. But, people think that they're writing stuff that makes sense.
hopefully, well, remember that we had a cut-off date, so we had a before and
Yeah,
after. Yeah,
February.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
No,
an
but I have to
important.
say, Stephen,
Yeah,
that I was already behind with town hall summaries, and all I had time to do was literally cut and paste whatever video work group had done in terms of timestamps and bung them into the tool. And now we've just automated that. So there's for a while before February, there wasn't really any audit going on. It was just like, all right, that's what they said happened. I don't have time to listen to the meeting and check. I'm just going to paste it in.
yeah. Well, that hopefully, I mean, again, I didn't. Nothing I haven't mentioned is that if you look at a graph, sorry, like here, so using this tool, GP also has a way to has a time slider. Yeah. So let's imagine you take all the data that's ever been produced by the archive work group over 3 years or so, and that creates an enormous graph, if you like, of different, and that will show you, who's doing the most meetings and all that kind of thing. And then you filter that by time. It will show you how structured that data is over time. So if you start to get chaotic data after, say, in the last year or so, let's say, hopefully that will show up in a particular pattern.
Well, you see, that's the thing. It's not going to be chaotic data, not completely.
Yeah.
I think what it is, sometimes it frustrates me trying to explain to people the subtleness of where a meeting summary has gone wrong. All I can say is that some documenters increasingly now are using a Read AI summary or another AI tool summary, and
Mm,
it's just a chatbot. And it doesn't understand our context, and it just kind of leaps on the things that it does understand the words for and makes
yeah.
a huge deal of them, and then completely misses really important things because it just doesn't know why it's important.
Mm,
And it's just, you end up getting summaries that are subtly off. And if I was to sit down and write them, I'd be like, okay, so that is wrong because, but laboriously going through that and explaining why it's wrong would take too much time, as we know. So what I'm interested to see is when we aggregate it all together, do we get a subtly wrong idea of what
mm,
the ambassador program is even doing? And that is where hopefully the community as a whole and individual work groups looking at the summaries of their work groups will be able to get a sense of it. And
yeah.
it's just like, do you know what I mean? It's really hard for some people to spot it in a summary
Yeah.
because they're just, I don't know, they're just not reading it that much. But then when you actually do look at it, it will be saying things that never happened and
Mm,
saying we've agreed things that we never agreed and saying we reached consensus when we never even attempted to reach a
mm.
consensus. And it's just like, just
I'm trying.
using words in a really vague and woolly way and saying things like, oh, we discussed this topic. And it's just like, yes, and what did we say about it?
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine a test case where, as I said earlier about the difference between structured and unstructured data. Yeah. So the only way I think you could maybe demonstrate that is that if you had, say, a certain work group structured data. So you said, here's all the meeting summary JSON that's structured hierarchically about this work group. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you compare that with, here's all the unstructured data that this work group has recorded about itself. Yeah. And those two, and also by the way, you have to apply slightly different methods, but that would show you
Yeah.
the similarity or the dissimilarity between the two different
I
approaches.
mean, this is the trouble, though, isn't it? That some of our meeting summary templates are far too heavy on unstructured data. And honestly, if I could turn the clock back 3 years, the one thing I would never have done is use the word narrative because
Mm,
it gives documenters the idea that what we want is a story. and that we want them to go, oh, so and so opened the meeting by welcoming everybody, and then so and so coughed, and then so and so wiped their nose. And it's just like, yeah, we don't care about that. We care about what was decided in the meeting. Meetings are meant to be functional, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean,
And
also,
we,
I mean,
this is what we were saying before about trying to use the insights from a knowledge graph, well, from the work that we're doing, to inform the summary tool redesign. How
absolutely.
structured does it need to be in order to get sense out of people?
Yeah. I'm also, let's imagine you're using a tool like Read AI to do a summary of a meeting, yeah? Or not Read AI, some AI, if you like, yeah? A generative model, yeah? Now, that's another thing we could maybe constrain. So you could say, okay, do this interpretation of this data, but use this structure. Um, you can tell the generative model
Maybe.
to you can tell the generative model to do that actually.
I think the
Uh,
problem with a lot of generative models is when you ask them to summarize, they are woolly. They will say things like, oh, such and such was discussed. Whereas what we want to know is, yeah, and what was decided?
yeah,
What points were made?
it depends on
You
the structure.
know,
Yeah, but that also does depend on the structure of the prompt as well,
to an
and
extent.
it does because
No, because I do think, well, anyway, I'm
yeah.
just looking at the time and
Sorry, yeah,
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 we're kind of going off the point here.
yeah. Okay. Anyway, so thanks for this discussion. It's helpful for me to actually expand out maybe where I need to prioritize work. So I think there needs to be, I suppose we need to come up with prioritize what we're interested in and what we need to focus on, I suppose. Yeah. So I'll just stop sharing. Um, anyway, thank you everyone for coming and contributing to the discussion. It's very helpful. And I'll look into atom space as well. That's interesting as well. Um, okay, so if anyone wants to stop recording, let's see.